Hello everyone and Merry Christmas. This is Kelly Cahoot and I'm here for CatScrappiness.com. Today I have a Christmas card to share with you using the Baby Jesus stamp and die set from Neat and Tangled. Here's the set, and it comes with the Baby Jesus on a bed of hay and then a sentiment that says, "Oh come, let us adore him," and then a couple of stars. I put the Baby Jesus and the hay onto my acrylic block, and I'm going to ink that up with VersaFine Black Onyx ink because I want to watercolor and use my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. And that VersaFine ink is waterproof. It won't bleed or run when you use water over the top of it. I'm going to stamp that image twice because I want to do the hay and then the baby in two separate pieces, and there are two separate dies in that set for that. One that cuts out all around the hay and then one that just cuts out the baby. So first I'm going to use my distress inks, and I'm going to use Scattered Straw, and I'm going to give that bed of hay just an all over once over with the color. And again, I'm not being careful to try to keep it away from the baby image because the top little baby there is the one that's going to be colored and added to the project. You're not going to see the one with the hay. So I like the all over color, but I wanted to add something else. I didn't want it just to be the flat yellow color. I wanted to add some more dimension. And so I'm taking Rusty Hinge and I just squish that onto my work surface, and I have a little bowl of water there, and I'm going to take a fine brush and just add on some of that Rusty Hinge into areas, especially around the baby where he's laying, where it would be just a little bit darker, and then also to add some details back into the hay, just the yellow parts. So I'm not being careful, I'm just kind of tapping that on to the paper. And so I go around the edges and then just kind of give it a little tap here and there. I take that Scattered Straw again, and I'm going to blend some of that in with some Scattered Straw and some water. And then I ended up taking some squeezed lemonade and adding just some bright points, bright yellow, just to the tips of the hay there to try to brighten it up a little bit. So I'm all finished with the hay parts now. I just take my chamois and wipe up my little glass work surface there, and then I take the heat tool and heat and set that hay color so I can go ahead and start on the baby image above that and not smear it. So again, I'm going to use my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers, and the first thing I'm going to do is take a flesh tone and go in and add some color just up around his hair and then blend it down over his face. I'm just giving kind of a base color there, and I'm going to let that dry for a few minutes. And I'm testing color as I go on the side there. I add a little bit of pigment, and then I'm going to pull that down into the little bit of hair that's showing. And it wasn't quite dark enough, so I added some more pigment, and then just going to move that around and smooth it out with the brush. So the next thing I'm going to do is take a darker color than that flesh tone, and I'm going to go in and add some shadows under his hair and around his face where the little blanket is wrapping up his face. And I'm going to take a damp brush and just kind of smooth that out over his skin. While his little face and hair are drying, I'm going to work on his blanket. The first thing I'm going to do is just add some pigment down onto the lines that are already stamped there, just to get some pigment and some color onto the image. So I take my damp brush and just go over and spread out that pigment where I've laid it down. And that'll just give a base color for his little blanket. And I've kind of learned while practicing with these markers that you can't let the pigment sit for too long. You kind of have to work in small areas, and so I just lay down a little bit of pigment and then move kind of quickly around to get that base color. And then you can do little bits and pieces here and there to finish it off. So again, I'm going in and laying some more pigment down, and then see, I'm just going to spread that over the top of that area there to smooth it out and to get a good coverage of the color. Okay, to finish the little baby's blanket off, I went up by his head and his face where it would be all folded and nestled around where it would be darker. And then again, just on those little crease lines down there wrapped around his body where you know it would be darker. And I added some more pigment there and just barely tapped it with my brush to spread it just a little bit so it stays darker on those stamped lines. I took the heat tool and set that, and then I'm going to add just a little bit of rosiness to his cheeks. I took one color and didn't care for the way that it turned out, and so I just smoothed it out the best I can with a little bit of water, and then I picked another color that went with his little fleshy tone there a little bit better, and instead of smoothing everything out with water that time, I took the base color that was that first flesh tone and I went around and smoothed it with that. So you can not only blend these zig markers out with water, but you can blend them with themselves. I took a fine tip black marker and went over his eyes, his nose, and his mouth just to brighten that up after it's been colored over. And then this is the die set that I was telling you about. So you have a die that goes all the way around the whole image, which includes the hay and the baby. And then you have that second die, which is just the baby. And so I'm going to use some Post-it to hold those down, and then I run those through my die cut machine. So I'm pulling these out and pull off my dies, and then when I lay the baby down, I immediately notice, I'm like, oh man, I forgot about the little line that the dies leave around the edge. And so I needed to fussy cut around the baby. After I did that, I took the black zig marker and just went right along that white cut edge, just so when you lay that down onto the hay, you don't see a stark white edge all around the sides. So now you can see what he looks like there on the little bed of hay. Now I'm going to work on the base or the background for the baby to lay on. So this is just an inexpensive paint or cosmetic brush, and I have some of the awesome Clarity brushes on order. They've just been back ordered, and I haven't gotten them yet. So I'm trying this. It works okay. All the little brush bristles just go everywhere, and so I'm anxious to try the Clarity brushes to see how they would compare. But anyway, so I'm adding a darker bed of color right there in the middle of the card where I'm going to put the baby. And I started out with a lighter blue Distress ink, and it wasn't giving me what I wanted. And so I went in with Blueprint Sketch and added a darker center. And then around the edges, I just brushed lightly on just a little bit of color. So the last thing I do to this little panel is I'm going to take some of the shimmer spritz and I unscrew the top and then just tap on to make little droplets. I don't want like a fine mist or a spray. I want it to be spotted. And so I tap that over the piece and then I lay on a paper towel, and that's going to pull up a little bit of the color there. But it also leaves some of the shimmer. You may be able to see a little bit as I turn it in the light. But I love the way that this turned out. It almost looks like the sky, or you could totally do that for like one of the galaxy backgrounds, or you know, a sky background. So this is how I'm going to set up the sentiment, and I'm going to use my Stampaholic stamping tool to get everything lined up just the way I want it. So I slip that down in the corner and add my magnets, and I'm going to set the sentiment up with the baby and the hay in there so I get it just right. And I'm going to close the door on my stamps and pick them up, and then I'm going to tip the whole thing up so I can make sure it's nice and straight, and then I can pull out the baby to ink up. And I ink up those edges, and I made a little bit of a mess, and so I use my fingers and just rub that off. Sometimes I press too hard on the lid and those little smudges get onto my card front, so I didn't want to mess up my pretty background there. So I wiped that off, and I was able to stamp this twice to darken up the color because of using that Stampaholic tool. I just left everything in place and inked it up one more time and stamped it. I'm just cleaning my stamps off with a chamois and then wiping down my surface, make sure I don't have any black ink. And then I'm going to add the hay onto the front with just a little bit of leftover foam tape. I save all my little leftover pieces and pop that right back into the center there. And then I'm going to adhere the baby Jesus flat onto the bed of hay. And this is the finished Christmas project. I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas. All the supplies can be found at catscrappiness.com. This is Kelly Cahoot. Merry Christmas, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.